The sound came first like a freight train made of screaming metal and splintered wood, bearing down on everything I'd spent 68 years building. I was in my storm cellar when it hit, clutching Eleanor's rosary and listening to my house being torn apart board by board above my head. When the silence finally came, I counted to 100 before I pushed open the heavy cellar door and climbed into what used to be my backyard. The oak tree where my children had built their treehouse was gone. The garden where Eleanor had grown her prize-winning tomatoes was buried under debris from 3 different houses. My pickup truck was wrapped around a telephone pole 4 blocks away, and my house, the 2-story Victorian, where I'd raised Michael and Sarah, where Eleanor and I had celebrated 43 anniversaries before cancer took her 5 years, Ugo had been erased from existence as completely as if it had never existed at all. I stood there in the rain that followed the tornado, holding nothing but the clothes on my back and Eleanor's rosary, and tried to understand that everything I owned in the world was scattered across Moore County, Oklahoma. The Red Cross volunteers found me an hour later sitting on what used to be my front steps, which were now just a pile of splintered wood in the middle of a debris field that used to be my neighborhood. "Sir, are you injured?" A young woman in a reflective vest knelt beside me, her voice gentle but urgent. "Do you need medical attention?" "I don't think so," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Everything felt distant and unreal, like I was watching someone else's disaster from a great height. "Do you have family in the area? Somewhere you can stay?" "My son," I said automatically. "Michael lives in Nichols Hills, Oklahoma City's wealthy suburb, where Michael had bought a house with his lawyer wife Jennifer after making partner at his firm. A world away from the working-class neighborhood where he'd grown up, where his mother and I had scrimped and saved to give him every opportunity we could afford. Can you contact him?" I tried my cell phone, but the towers were down. The volunteer her name tag said, "Ashley, let me use her satellite phone." "Dad?" Michael's voice was tight with concern when he answered. "Jesus Christ, I saw the news. Are you okay? Is the house?" "The house is gone," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Everything's gone." A long pause. "Gone?" "Completely. I'm with the Red Cross now, but I need somewhere to go." "Of course, Dad, of course. Give me the address. I'll come get you." While I waited for Michael, I tried to inventory what I'd lost. Photo albums with 40 years of Christmas mornings and birthday parties. Eleanor's wedding dress preserved in tissue paper in the bedroom closet. My father's tools still organized in the garage workshop where I taught Michael to change oil and fix leaky faucets. The rocking chair where Eleanor had nursed both children, where I'd held her during her last months when the pain got too bad for sleeping in. Bed. 43 years of accumulated life, reduced to memory and insurance claims. Michael arrived in his silver Lexus, looking like he'd come straight from the office. Expensive suit, silk tie, Italian leather shoes that had probably never touched anything dirtier than a courthouse marble floor. At 35, my son had achieved everything Eleanor and I had dreamed for him. Prestigious career, beautiful home, financial security that we'd never known growing up. But when he got out of the car and saw me sitting in the wreckage of his childhood home, something flickered across his face that I couldn't quite read. Not just shock at the devastation, but something else. Something that looked almost like calculation. "Dad, my God." He picked his way carefully through the debris, trying not to get his shoes muddy. "I can't believe it's all gone. Nature doesn't ask permission," I said, standing up slowly. My back was stiff from sitting on the steps, and I realized I was probably in shock. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Michael put his hand on my arm, guiding me toward his car like I was an invalid. "Jennifer's making up the guest room." The guest room. I'd stayed there exactly twice in the 5 years since Eleanor died, Christmas and Michael's birthday. Both times, I'd felt like an intruder in their perfect house, surrounded by furniture that looked like it had been photographed for a magazine and art that had been chosen by an interior decorator rather than acquired through years of living. The drive to Nichols Hills was quiet except for Michael's occasional questions about insurance and whether I'd contacted FEMA and what I planned to do about rebuilding. Practical questions. The kind of questions a lawyer asks when he's trying to assess the scope of a problem that's landed on his desk. I haven't thought that far ahead, I admitted. Right now I'm just trying to process that everything's gone. Right? Of course. One step at a time. But I could see him thinking, already planning, trying to figure out how to manage this crisis that had suddenly disrupted his carefully ordered life. Michael's house sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured lawn, surrounded by the kind of mature trees that cost thousands of dollars to plant and maintain. It was beautiful in the way that money could make things beautiful, impressive, enviable, and somehow cold despite all the warm touches Jennifer had added. Jennifer met us at the door, blonde and polished and wearing the kind of concerned expression that people practice in mirrors. "Robert, I'm so sorry. This must be so overwhelming for you. Thank you for taking me in," I said. "I know this is an imposition. Don't be silly. Your family," but something in her voice suggested that family was a burden she'd accepted rather than a joy she embraced. They showed me to the guest room on the 2nd floor. Space decorated in neutral tones with a queen bed that had clearly never been slept in and artwork that perfectly matched the curtains. Everything was clean and comfortable and utterly impersonal. "There are towels in the bathroom," Jennifer said, "and I put some of Michael's old clothes in the closet in case you need anything." "I appreciate it. I'll try not to be any trouble." "You're not trouble, Dad," Michael said, but he was already checking his phone. "I have to make some calls, cancel my evening meetings, that kind of thing. We can talk more over dinner, figure out what comes next." After they left, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to understand how quickly everything had changed. This morning I'd been Robert Chun, retired machinist, living independently in the house he'd bought with his wife in 1982. Tonight I was Robert Chun, homeless senior citizen, dependent on his son's charity and sleeping in a room that felt more like a hotel than a home. Eleanor's rosary was still wrapped around my hand. I'd been holding it so tightly that the beads had left marks on my palm. She'd carried it through labor when Michael and Sarah were born, through my cancer scare 10 years ago, through her own final illness when prayer was the only thing that seemed to help with the pain. Now it was all I had left of her, of us, of the life we built together. Dinner was awkward in the way that meals are when nobody knows what to talk about. Jennifer had ordered Chinese takeout apparently. My arrival had disrupted her meal planning and we ate lo mein and sweet and sour pork while making careful conversation about insurance adjusters and temporary housing assistance. "Important thing," Michael said, stabbing at a piece of broccoli, "is not to make any hasty decisions. Take time to process what happened, explore all your options." "What kind of options?" "Well, rebuilding is one possibility. But given your age, it might make more sense to consider alternatives." "Alternatives like what?" Jennifer and Michael exchanged a look across the table. "There are some wonderful senior communities in the area," Jennifer said gently. "Places where you wouldn't have to worry about home maintenance or yard work or being alone if something happened. Senior communities. Nursing homes with better marketing." "I'm 68, not 98, I said. "I think I can manage to take care of myself." "Of course you can," Michael said quickly. "But this could be an opportunity to simplify your life, maybe find somewhere with more support services." "You mean somewhere that doesn't require you to worry about your old man?" "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Michael set down his chopsticks and looked at me with the patient expression he probably used on difficult clients. "Dad, I'm trying to help you think through this rationally. You've just suffered a major trauma. This isn't the time to be making emotional decisions about rebuilding or trying to recreate what you lost. What I lost was my home. The place where I lived with your mother for 35 years, where you and Sarah grew up, where every room held memories that mattered. I understand that. But memories aren't tied to buildings. They're in here. He tapped his chest. You can carry those anywhere. It was the kind of thing people said when they'd never lost everything they owned to forces beyond their control. Easy wisdom from someone whose own memories were safely preserved in photo albums and home videos, and a house that hadn't been torn apart by wind. That night, lying in the guest bed between sheets that smelled like expensive fabric softener, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what came next. At 68, starting over felt impossible. Building a new house, replacing 40 years of accumulated possessions, learning to live somewhere that didn't carry the echoes of Eleanor's laughter or the Polish children's voices, it was like being asked to become a completely different person. But staying here, in Michael and Jennifer's perfect house where I felt like a disruption to their routine, didn't feel sustainable either. I was still awake at 2 in the morning when I heard voices downstairs. Michael and Jennifer talking in the kind of hushed tones people use when they're discussing something they don't want to be overheard. I couldn't make out specific words, but the rhythm was familiar, one person expressing concerns, the other person trying to find solutions, both of them sounding like they were dealing with a problem that needed to be solved quickly and efficiently. The problem, I realized, was Midot the next morning. Michael left early for the office after promising we'd continue the conversation over dinner. Jennifer was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with having a long-term house guest disrupting her routines. I spent the day trying to make myself useful, washing the dishes from breakfast, straightening up the already immaculate living room, sitting in the backyard and trying not to think about everything I'd lost. Around noon, the insurance adjuster called. The damage assessment was complete. Total loss, no possibility of salvage. The settlement would be enough to rebuild, but the process would take months, maybe years, depending on contractor availability and permit approvals. What about temporary housing assistance? I asked. That's available, but it's capped at 12 months. After that, you're responsible for your own living expenses while construction continues. 12 months of help, 24 months of rebuilding. The math wasn't encouraging for someone living on Social Security and a modest pension. When Michael came home that evening, I told him about the insurance call. So you're looking at least 2 years before you could move back in, he said, processing the information. Assuming you decide to rebuild. I haven't decided anything yet. Dad, we need to talk about the living situation here. My stomach dropped. Okay, Jennifer and I. We've been discussing this, and we think it might be better if you looked into some temporary housing while you're figuring out your long-term plans. Temporary housing. There are extended stay hotels, short-term rental apartments, that kind of thing. Places where you'd have more privacy and independence. While you're sorting through your options, you want me to leave. We want you to have space to make the right decisions for your future, without feeling like you're imposing on us. There was that word again, imposing, as if needing help from your own son after losing everything in a natural disaster was some kind of personal failing. How long? I asked. How long what? How long do I have before I become too much of an imposition? Michael's jaw tightened. That's not fair, Dad. We're trying to help you maintain your dignity and independence. By asking me to leave after 2 days? By giving you options that don't involve disrupting everyone's lives, indefinitely. Everyone's lives. I stood up from the kitchen table. Meaning your life. And Jennifer's life. Because God forbid your homeless father should inconvenience you for more than 48 hours. Dad, no, I get it. I understand exactly what's happening here. I walked toward the stairs, then turned back. You know what I learned today, Michael? I learned that I raised a son who sees his father's crisis as a problem to be managed rather than a parent to be helped. That's not true. Then prove it. Tell me I can stay here as long as I need to while I figure out what comes next. Tell me you want me here, not just that you're willing to tolerate me for a predetermined amount of time. Michael was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I got my answer. I'll start looking for somewhere else to go, I said. Dad, don't be like this. We can work something out. But we both knew the something we'd work out would involve me leaving as quickly and quietly as possible. I went upstairs to pack the few items I'd accumulated over 2 days, Eleanor's rosary, the clothes Jennifer had loaned me, a toothbrush I'd bought at the drugstore. It didn't take long. When you own nothing, packing is simple. I was zipping up the small duffel bag Michael had given me when I heard the front door slam and Jennifer's voice, sharp with frustration. How long is this going to go on, Michael? We can't have him living here indefinitely. I know. I'm working on it. Work faster. My mother's coming to visit next week, and I don't want to have to explain why your father is camped out in our guest room. I'll talk to him tomorrow. Maybe suggest some assisted living places, see if we can speed up the decision-making process. Assisted living. The conversation had moved from temporary housing to permanent warehousing. In less than 48 hours, I finished packing and went downstairs, where Michael and Jennifer were standing in the kitchen looking like they were discussing a business problem that required immediate resolution. I found a place, I lied. I'll be out of your way tomorrow morning. Relief flooded Michael's face so quickly he couldn't hide it. Dad, you don't have to rush into anything. We just think. You think I should be someone else's problem. I understand. That's not what we think. Then what do you think, Michael? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my son is trying to get rid of me as quickly and politely as possible. Michael's expression hardened. I think you're being unfair and dramatic. I think you're making this about rejection when it's really about finding the best solution for everyone involved. The best solution for everyone, meaning the solution that gets me out of your house. If that's how you want to see it, that's how it is. I picked up my duffel bag and walked toward the front door. Where are you going? Jennifer asked. To find out what family actually looks like, I said, and I walked out into the night, carrying everything I owned in a borrowed bag, with nowhere to go and no one to call. But at least I was done pretending. That blood was thicker than convenience. At least I was done believing that the people who should love you most were the ones who actually would. I spent that first night in my car in a Walmart parking lot, trying to figure out where someone goes when their own son doesn't want them. The car was a 15-year-old Honda Civic that had survived the tornado by pure luck. I'd parked it at the grocery store when the sirens went off, and somehow it had escaped the path of destruction. Now it was my home. I'd bought a pillow and a blanket from the Walmart, along with some basic toiletries and a cooler I could fill with ice to keep food cold. The night manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, had told me I could stay until morning as long as I didn't cause any trouble. We get a lot of folks in transition, she'd said with the weary kindness of someone who'd seen her share of people with nowhere else to go. Just keep a low profile. I tried to sleep stretched across the front seats, but comfort wasn't really the issue. It was the crushing weight of understanding that at 68 years old, I was homeless not because of the tornado insurance and FEMA could handle that, but because my own family had decided I was too much trouble to help out around dawn. I called Sarah in Denver. Dad? Why are you calling so early? Is everything okay? I told her about the tornado, about losing the house, about Michael and Jennifer's response to having me as a house guest. What do you mean, they asked you to leave? Sarah's voice was sharp with disbelief. You lost everything and they're worried about inconvenience? They want me to look into senior living communities. Think it's a better long-term solution than rebuilding. What do you want to do? It was the first time anyone had asked me that question. I don't know, I said honestly. I can't rebuild. The insurance money won't cover 2 years of temporary housing plus construction costs. But I'm not ready for a nursing home either. Then come stay with us. Tom and I have plenty of space, and the kids would love to have Grandpa around for a while. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Sarah had always been the more compassionate of my 2 children, more like her mother in temperament. But Denver was 1,400 miles from everything I'd ever known, from Eleanor's grave, from the few neighbors who'd survived the tornado. That's generous, sweetheart, but I can't uproot my whole life and move across the country. Why not? What's keeping you in Oklahoma? It was a reasonable question and one I couldn't answer with anything concrete. Habit, maybe. Stubbornness. The irrational belief that home was a place rather than just wherever you happened to be. Sleeping. Let me think about it, I said. Dad, don't let pride keep you from accepting help. Not everyone's like Michael. After we hung up, I drove to the ruins of my neighborhood to see if the cleanup crews had found anything salvageable. They'd hauled away most of the large debris, but the lot was still scattered with personal items that had belonged to families I'd never met. Children's toys, books, photographs that had blown in from blocks away. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson was standing in what used to be her garden, holding a ceramic angel that had somehow survived unbroken while everything around it was destroyed. Robert, she said when she saw me, I heard about your place. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about yours too. Alice, at least we both made it out alive. That's what matters. She clutched the angel tighter. Though I have to admit, at my age, starting over feels impossible. Alice was 73, a widow like me, though she'd been alone longer. Her children lived on the East Coast and visited maybe twice a year. Where are you staying? I asked. With my sister in Norman, at least temporarily. She's been after me for years to move closer to her anyway. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling me it's time. She looked at the angel in her hands. What about you? Still figuring that out. Your son Michael, isn't he in Nichols Hills? That's good that you have family nearby. I didn't have the heart to tell her that family proximity and family support weren't the same thing. Later that morning, I got a call from Michael. Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I want to apologize. We got off on the wrong foot. Did we? Yes. Look, Jennifer and I talked, and we want you to come back. We can make this work for a few more days while you explore your options. A few more days. The generosity was overwhelming. I'm fine where I am, I said. Where are you? Somewhere I'm not imposing on anyone. Dad, don't be stubborn. Come back to the house. We'll figure something out. Like what? Well, I've been doing some research. There are some really nice assisted living communities in the area. Places where you could have your own apartment, but with services available if you need them. And how exactly would I pay for these really nice communities? Well, that's the thing. If you sold the lot where your house was, and combined that with the insurance settlement, you'd have enough for a down payment and probably 3 or 4 years of monthly fees. 3 or 4 years. And then what? Then we'd figure something else out. If he was planning to be involved in whatever came after I ran out of money. Michael, let me ask you something. If you lost your house, if you had nowhere to go, would I be calculating how long I could tolerate having you around? That's different. How? Because we have responsibilities, commitments, a lifestyle that doesn't easily accommodate, a lifestyle that doesn't accommodate your father. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. I hung up and sat in the Walmart parking lot, watching people go about their normal lives, buying groceries, running errands, taking for granted that they had homes to return to and families who wanted them there. Around noon, I drove to the Red Cross shelter that had been set up at the local high school. Maybe there would be resources there, people who understood what it was like to lose everything and be treated like a burden by the people who should care most. Shelter was organized, chaos cots arranged in the gymnasium, tables staffed by volunteers helping people fill out paperwork, children playing with donated toys while their parents tried to figure out what came next. Everyone looked shell-shocked but determined, united by shared disaster and the stubborn human refusal to give up. I found the coordinator, a middle-aged man named Jim who looked like he'd been running on coffee and determination for days. "Are you looking for shelter?" he asked. "We've got space if you need it." "I'm not sure what I'm looking for," I said honestly. "That's okay. Most folks don't, right after something like this." "Have you been in touch with FEMA about temporary housing assistance?" "My insurance covers that." "My situation is complicated." Jim looked at me with the kind of practiced assessment that comes from dealing with disaster victims all day long. "Want to talk about it?" I found myself telling him about Michael, about being asked to leave after 2 days, about feeling like I was being managed rather than helped. "I see this more than you'd think," Jim said when I finished. "Adult children who love their parents in theory, but can't handle the reality of actually taking care of them. I don't need taking care of. I just need somewhere to stay while I figure out what's next. I know. But to them, having an older parent in their house feels like a preview of what's coming: aging, dependence, mortality. Makes them uncomfortable, so they find ways to outsource the problem. So what do people in my situation do? Depends. Some folks move in with other relatives. Some find senior housing if they can afford it. Some just make do on their own however they can. He handed me a list of resource-easy emergency housing programs, senior services organizations, legal aid clinics that helped with insurance claims. "There's also this," he said, pulling out another flyer. "St. Vincent's has a program for displaced seniors. Not just housing, but community support, help navigating benefits, that kind of thing. Might be worth checking out." That afternoon, I drove to St. Vincent's Catholic Church in downtown Oklahoma City. It was an old brick building that looked like it had survived everything the 20th century could throw at it. The Dust Bowl, World War II, urban decay, and urban renewal. Father Martinez was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who listened to my story without judgment or surprise. "You're not the first person to discover that family relationships don't always survive crisis," he said. "Sometimes disaster reveals who people really are underneath the social conventions. I don't want to believe that about my son. Maybe he'll surprise you. Maybe this is just fear talking, and he'll come around when he has time to process what happened. But in the meantime, you need practical solutions." He showed me to a small apartment above the church rectory, one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a window that looked out on a garden where someone was growing vegetables between the headstones of priests who'd served the parish over the past century. "It's not much," Father Martinez said, "but it's clean and safe, and the rent is whatever you can afford. Why would you do this for a stranger? Because taking care of people is what we're supposed to do. And because everyone deserves a place where they're welcome, especially when the people who should welcome them don't." I moved in that evening, carrying my few possessions up the narrow stairs to a space that was smaller than Michael's guest bathroom, but somehow felt more like home than anywhere I'd been since the tornado. My phone rang as I was unpacking. Michael again. "Dad, where are you?" "I went by the Walmart, and your car wasn't there. I found a place." "What kind of place?" "The kind where I'm not a burden or an imposition." "Dad, you're being ridiculous. Come back to the house. We can make this work." "For how long, Michael?" "How long before Jennifer starts complaining about her disrupted routines?" How long before you start hinting about senior communities again? How long before I stop being your father and start being a problem you need to solve? It doesn't have to be like that, but it is like that. It has been like that since the moment I walked into your house. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would be a son who says, "Dad, your family. Stay as long as you need." Fair would be a son who helps his father rebuild instead of pushing him toward the nearest nursing home. Fair would be a son who remembers that the man he's trying to get rid of worked 2 jobs to pay for the education that bought him that fancy house. Dad, I'm not finished. You know what I realized today? I realized that losing my house wasn't the worst thing that happened to me this week. The worst thing was discovering that I raised a son who sees his father's crisis as an inconvenience to be managed. If that's how you really feel, that's how you made me feel. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Where are you staying? Michael asked finally. Somewhere safe. Dad, don't be stubborn about this. Let me help you. You had your chance to help me. You chose to manage me instead. After I hung up, I sat on the narrow bed and looked around my new home. It wasn't much a single room with donated furniture and walls thin enough that I could hear Father Martinez moving around downstairs. But it was mine for as long as I needed it, offered without conditions or timelines or suggestions about what I should want. Instead of what I actually needed, for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, Michael called. He's worried about you. Please let us help. I typed back. I'm fine. Found a safe place to stay. We'll call soon, but I knew that fine was relative. I had shelter, which was more than I'd had 12 hours ago. I had a few $100s in my wallet and Social Security coming next week. I had my health, my mind, and Eleanor's rosary. What I didn't have was a family that wanted me around when times got tough. What I didn't know yet was that sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born into, but the one you find when everything else falls apart. That discovery was still coming. And it would change everything. 3 weeks later, I was starting to understand what people meant when they talked about rebuilding. Not just houses, those were the easy part, assuming you had insurance and contractors and time. But rebuilding the idea of who you were when everything familiar had been stripped away. Living at St. Vincent's had developed its own rhythm. I woke early and helped Father Martinez with morning preparations, attended Mass not because I was particularly religious, but because it was the closest thing to community I'd found. Afternoons I spent at the Red Cross Center, helping other tornado victims navigate insurance claims and FEMA. Paperwork. Turns out 40 years of dealing with bureaucracy at the plant had given me skills that were useful to people whose lives had been turned upside down. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life that felt purposeful in ways I hadn't expected. Michael called every few days. Conversations that followed the same pattern. Concern for my welfare. Gentle suggestions about exploring options. Increasing frustration that I wouldn't come back to discuss sensible solutions to my housing situation. Dad, you can't live in a church rectory forever, he said during one particularly tense phone call. It's not sustainable long term. Neither is being unwelcome in my son's house. You were welcome. We just thought you'd be more comfortable with your own space. Your own space meaning anywhere but their guest room. I was comfortable, I said. You and Jennifer were the ones who were uncomfortable. That's not... Look, we've talked about this. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We can discuss some of the options I've researched. What kind of options? I found 3 different senior communities that are really impressive. One of them even has a waiting list. That's how desirable it is. Michael, I'm 68, not 88. I don't need to be warehoused with activities directors and meal plans. You need to be realistic about your future. What happens if you get sick? What happens if you fall and break a hip? What happens when you're too old to take care of yourself? What happens is I'll deal with it when it happens, like everyone else does. What I won't do is surrender my independence because you're worried about hypothetical emergencies. It's not hypothetical, Dad. It's planning. It's being responsible about aging. It's being terrified of having to take care of your father if something goes wrong. The accusation hung between us like smoke. That's not fair, Michael said finally, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, every conversation we have is about finding ways to make sure you never have to worry about me. Do worry about you. You worry about the inconvenience I might become. That's different. We hung up without resolving anything. As usual, the breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in June. I was at the Red Cross Center, helping a young mother fill out paperwork for temporary housing assistance. When Michael walked in, he looked out of place among the disaster victims and volunteers, too well-dressed, too clean, like a politician doing a photo op at a homeless shelter. He spotted me across the gymnasium and walked over with a kind of determined expression that meant he'd planned this encounter. Dad, we need to talk. I'm helping Mrs. Rodriguez with her FEMA application. This can't wait. Mrs. Rodriguez looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension. It's okay, Mr. Chun. I can finish this later. I followed Michael outside to the parking lot, where he'd parked his Lexus between a pickup truck held together with duct tape and a minivan with a God Bless decal covering a cracked rear window. What's so urgent that you had to track me down here? Jennifer's pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. My son was going to be a father, and he'd driven across town to tell me in a parking lot because he couldn't have this conversation anywhere I might feel. Welcome. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. Congratulations. Thank you. Michael seemed surprised by my reaction, like he'd expected anger or demands rather than genuine happiness. When is the baby due? February. We just found out last week. Boy or girl? Too early to tell. But Dad, this changes things. Jennifer is going to need space, time to prepare. We're going to need to convert the guest room into a nursery. There it was. The real reason for this parking lot conversation. I see, which means we really need to finalize your living situation. Find you something permanent, something that works for the long term, something that doesn't involve your guest room, something that gives you independence and gives us space for our growing family. Independence. I almost laughed. Is that what we're calling it now? Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. How am I making it hard? By existing? By needing somewhere to live after my house was destroyed? By refusing to consider reasonable options for your future. Reasonable for who? Michael rubbed his forehead, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was frustrated with homework or chores that seemed impossibly difficult. Look, I brought some brochures, he said, pulling a manila folder from his car. 3 different communities, all with excellent ratings. If you just look at them with an open mind, no. Dad, be realistic. You're living in a church rectory. That's not a long-term solution. It's working fine for now. For now, yes. But what about when Father Martinez needs the space for someone else? What about when your back gets worse, or you have another health scare, or you need help with daily tasks? Then I'll figure it out. Like, I've been figuring everything else out since you decided I was too much trouble to house for more than 2 days. It wasn't about trouble. Then what was it about, Michael? Because I'm having a hard time understanding how a father who loses everything in a tornado becomes a problem that needs to be solved, rather than a parent who needs help. Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the brochures in his hands. You want the truth? He said finally. I'd like to try it for a change. The truth is that having you in our house scared the hell out of me. Not because you were trouble, but because it felt like a preview of what's coming. You getting older, needing more help, eventually needing full-time care. And I looked at that future and panicked. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me since the tornado. So you decided to skip ahead to the end. Get me settled somewhere with professional caregivers so you could pretend the in-between part doesn't exist. I decided to be practical about a situation that was only going to get more complicated. You decided to be a coward. Michael's face flushed red. I'm trying to do what's best for everyone involved. No, you're trying to do what's easiest for you. There's a difference. And what would you have me do? Give up my career to take care of you? Turn my house into a nursing home? Sacrifice my marriage and my future children so you can avoid facing reality about your situation? I'd have you treat me like your father instead of a burden. I'd have you remember that family means showing up when things get hard, not finding ways to make the hard things someone else's responsibility. That's not fair. Fair? I handed the brochures back to him without opening them. You want to talk about fair? Fair would be a son who says, Dad, I know this is hard, but we'll figure it out together. Fair would be a son who helps his father rebuild instead of pushing him into institutional care. Fair would be a son who remembers that the man standing in front of him worked 16-hour days to pay for the college degree that made this conversation possible. Michael stared at the brochures in his hands. What do you want from me? I want you to want me in your life. Not manage me, not solve me, not warehouse me somewhere convenient. I want my son to be glad his father survived the tornado instead of treating my survival like a problem that needs fixing. I am glad you survived. Are you? Because you've spent a month trying to get rid of me. I've spent a month trying to find you a good living situation that meets your needs and gives you dignity. My dignity doesn't depend on where I live, Michael. It depends on being treated like I matter by the people who are supposed to love me. We stood there in the parking lot, surrounded by the cars of people whose lives had been turned upside down by circumstances beyond their control. And I realized that this was it. This was the moment when I had to choose between continuing to hope my son would become the person I needed him to be, or accepting that he'd already shown me exactly who he was. I have to go, I said. Mrs. Rodriguez needs help with her paperwork. Dad, wait. This doesn't have to end like this. Come to dinner tomorrow. Meet with the administrator from Sunrise Manor. Just look at what they're offering. What are they offering that I don't already have? Security, professional care, a community of people your own age. And what am I offering that they can't provide? Michael looked confused by the question. I'm offering a grandfather for your child, I said. Someone who could teach them to change oil and fix leaky faucets and work with their hands. Someone who could tell them stories about their grandmother, about what your father was like when he was young, about what it means to build something that lasts. You could still do all that from Sunrise Manor. Could I? When? During visiting hours? On scheduled family days? While activities directors are planning my social calendar and meal planners are deciding what I eat? Dad, you're being dramatic. I'm being honest about what you're asking me to give up. What I'm asking you to give up is the pretense that you can live independently forever. I'm living independently, right now, in a church rectory, dependent on charity, dependent on kindness. There's a difference. Michael closed the folder of brochures and tucked it under his arm. I can't force you to be reasonable about this. No, you can't. But I also can't enable you to make choices that are going to hurt you in the long run. What choices are those? Refusing to plan for your future. Refusing to acknowledge that you're going to need more help as you get older. Refusing to make decisions while you still can instead of waiting until they're made for you. You mean refusing to do what you want me to do? Mean refusing to do what's best for you? According to you. According to reality. I looked at my son successful, well-educated, financially secure, completely confident that he understood my situation better than I did, and felt something settle in my chest that might have been grief or relief. Michael, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. I would rather spend whatever time I have left in that little room above Father Martinez's office, feeling welcome and useful and valued, than spend it in the most luxurious senior community in the world feeling like I'd been put there to make my family's life easier. That's not why. That's exactly why. And until you can admit that, we don't have anything else to discuss. I walked back toward the Red Cross Center, but Michael called after me. Dad, wait. There's something else. I turned around. Jennifer and I. We think it might be better if you didn't visit for a while. At least not until after the baby comes. She's having some morning sickness, and stress isn't good for the pregnancy. There it was. The final door closing. I see, I said. It's just temporary. Just until things settle down. Of course. And obviously you'll be welcome once the baby's here. We'll want our child to know their grandfather. Will you? Of course we will. But not at your house. Not in your daily life. Just for scheduled visits when it's convenient and doesn't interfere with your routines. Dad, you're twisting this into something it's not. I'm understanding it for exactly what it is. I looked at Michael one last time, trying to memorize his face before whatever relationship we'd managed to maintain finally died completely. Congratulations on the pregnancy, I said. I hope you'll be a better father to your child than you've been a son to yours. Then I walked back into the Red Cross Center, where Mrs. Rodriguez was still waiting for help with paperwork that would determine whether her family had anywhere to live next month. At least there. Being useful mattered more than being convenient. At least there. People understood that family was supposed to show up when things got hard, not find excuses to stay away. I spent the rest of the afternoon helping tornado victims navigate bureaucracy and thinking about what it meant to be officially unwelcome in my son's life. It hurt less than I'd expected. Maybe because I'd already grieved the son I'd thought I had. Maybe because I was finally ready to find out what family actually looked like when it wasn't based on obligation or guilt or the accident of shared DNA. That discovery was closer than I thought. 6 months after the tornado destroyed my house, I was standing in the kitchen of a place I'd never expected to call home, making coffee for 12 people and listening to the sound of children's laughter drifting in from the backyard. House belonged to Maria Santos, a widow I'd met at the Red Cross Center 3 months earlier. She'd been there helping her nephew navigate insurance claims after losing his apartment, and we'd struck up a conversation about what it meant to rebuild not just structures, but lives. You know what I learned after my husband died? She'd told me over terrible coffee and donated donuts. I learned that the size of your family isn't determined by how many people share your last name. It's determined by how many people would drop everything to help you when your world falls apart. Now I was living in her guest house, a converted garage apartment that she'd offered when Father Martinez mentioned that the church needed the rectory space for a new priest. It was small but comfortable, with its own entrance and kitchenette, and rent that consisted of helping with yard work and being available if she needed anything. But the real family I'd discovered wasn't just Maria. It was the collection of people who'd somehow become central to my daily life. Mrs. Patterson from my old neighborhood, who'd moved in with Maria after her sister died. James Wilson, a retired teacher who'd lost his house 2 blocks from mine and now lived in the main house's spare bedroom. Carmen Rodriguez, whose FEMA paperwork I'd helped fill out and who came by 3 times a week to cook dinner for all of us, whether we needed it or not. We'd become what Maria called a family of choice, people who'd been thrown together by disaster and decided to stay together by design. This particular morning was special because it was Thanksgiving, and our unconventional household was hosting dinner for 15 people, all of whom had been displaced or isolated or abandoned in various ways by the tornadoes of life. Robert, can you help me with this turkey? Carmen called from the oven. where she was wrestling with a 20-pound bird that looked big enough to feed a small army. "Coming," I said, setting down the coffee pot and grabbing the carving tools I'd bought. Specifically for occasions like this. It was funny how natural this felt, being useful, being needed, being part of a daily routine that revolved around taking care of each other rather than managing each other. At 70, I was busier than I'd been since retiring from the plant. Between helping at the Red Cross Center, maintaining Maria's property, and coordinating the informal support network we built for other disaster survivors, I barely had time to feel sorry for myself. The phone rang as I was lifting the turkey out of the oven. Maria answered it in the living room, and I could hear her side of the conversation, polite but slightly strained. The way she talked to telemarketers or people trying to sell her things she didn't need. "Robert," she called. "It's for you." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and took the phone, expecting another volunteer coordinator or maybe Sarah calling to wish me happy Thanksgiving. "Dad?" Michael's voice stopped me cold. We hadn't spoken since that conversation in the Red Cross parking lot 6 months ago. "Michael, I wanted to call and wish you happy Thanksgiving. Thank you." "Same to you." An awkward pause. "How are you doing? Where are you staying now?" "I'm fine. I found a good situation." "That's good." I'm glad to hear that." Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, Jennifer talking to someone. Maybe her mother, and what sounded like a baby crying. "The baby came early," Michael said, apparently noticing that I'd heard. 3 weeks ago. A girl. Emma Rose, my granddaughter. Born 3 weeks ago, and this was the first I was hearing about it. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Is everyone healthy?" "Yes, thank God. She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs that work overtime." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "We're not getting much sleep, but that's normal, right?" "It's normal, Dad. I've been thinking about things. About what you said back in June. About what kind of father I want to be. What kind of family I want Emma to grow up in." I waited. Would you like to meet her? Your granddaughter?" For a moment, I felt the old longing, the pull of blood family, the desire to be part of my son's life, to hold a grandchild who carried Eleanor's genes and my stubborn chin. "When?" I asked. "Well, that's the thing. Jennifer's still recovering, and the house is pretty chaotic right now. We don't really have space for visitors." There it was. The same song, different verse. "We don't have room for you." The words I'd been expecting for 6 months, finally spoken out loud. "I see," I said. "But maybe after the holidays, once things settle down, we could arrange something. Maybe meet at a restaurant, somewhere neutral where Emma could get used to you gradually. Neutral territory. Like I was a potentially dangerous stranger rather than her grandfather." "Michael," I said quietly, "do you hear yourself?" "What do you mean?" "You're talking about introducing me to my granddaughter. Like I'm someone who might need to be screened by security first. That's not. I just meant somewhere comfortable for everyone. Comfortable for you." "You mean?" "Dad, please don't make this difficult. I'm trying to rebuild our relationship here." "No, you're trying to manage it. Just like you've been trying to manage me since the tornado. And you know what I've learned in the past 6 months?" "What?" "I've learned that I don't want to be managed. I want to be wanted. And if you can't offer that, if the best you can do is supervised visits in neutral locations when it's convenient for your schedule, then I think we both know where we stand." "Dad, that's not fair. I'm dealing with a newborn, a wife who's struggling with postpartum recovery, work pressures, and a father who's an inconvenience you'd rather not add to that list." "That's not true, isn't it? Because it sounds to me like you're doing exactly what you've always done, trying to fit me into your life in the smallest, most convenient way possible." Michael was quiet for a long moment. What do you want from me? I wanted you to want me in your life. Not tolerate me, not accommodate me when it was easy, but actually want your father around to help raise his granddaughter. I do want that. No, you don't. You want the idea of that when it doesn't interfere with anything else you have going on. But you don't want the reality of it. And what's the reality? The reality is that grandfathers don't just show up for photo opportunities. They show up for middle-of-the-night crying fits and diaper emergencies and the thousand small moments that happen between the convenient times. They show up when it's messy and complicated and inconvenient. And you think I don't want that? I think you've spent the last 6 months proving that you don't want that. I could hear Emma crying in the background, and Jennifer's voice saying something about feeding time. I have to go, Michael said. But Dad, think about what I said. About meeting Emma. She's your granddaughter. She's your daughter first. And you've made it clear that there's no room in her life for someone you can't control or manage or schedule around your convenience. Dad, give Emma my love, I said. And maybe someday, when she's old enough to make her own decisions about who she wants in her life, we can meet properly. I hung up and stood in Maria's kitchen, holding the phone and trying to process the conversation. Bad news? Maria asked, appearing in the doorway with her arms full of dinner rolls. Family news, I said. Which amounts to the same thing. Your son? I told her about the call, about the granddaughter I'd never meet, about the invitation that wasn't really an invitation but another attempt to manage me at arm's length. I'm sorry, Maria said when I finished. That must hurt. It does, but not as much as I expected. Why do you think that is? I looked around Maria's kitchen, where Carmen was mashing potatoes and Mrs. Patterson was arranging flowers she'd cut from the garden. Through the window, I could see James teaching Maria's nephew how to throw a football, while 3 other kids I didn't know by name but knew by heart waited their turn. Because I already have a family, I said. I already have people who want me around not because they have to, but because they choose to. Blood isn't everything, Maria said. No, it's not. Care is everything. Showing up is everything. Making space in your life for people not because it's convenient, but because they matter to you. And your son doesn't do that? My son wants to love me on his terms, in his time frame, according to his schedule. He wants a father who's grateful for whatever scraps of attention he's willing to offer. And you're not that father anymore. I'm not that father anymore. The doorbell rang, and Maria went to answer it. A few minutes later, she returned with Father Martinez and 2 families. I recognized from the disaster assistance program people whose houses had been destroyed in a different tornado, in a different town, but whose stories were familiar variations on loss and resilience and the long process of rebuilding. By the time we sat down for dinner, there were 18 people crowded around a table meant for 12. Using a mixture of matching plates and mismatched dishes and paper goods from the dollar store. It was chaotic and loud and completely imperfect. It was also the most grateful I'd felt in years. Before we eat, Maria said, I'd like everyone to share something they're thankful for this year. We went around the table, stories of survival and recovery, of unexpected kindness from strangers, of discovering strengths they didn't know they had. When it was my turn, I looked around at these people, who'd become my family not through accident of birth but through deliberate choice. I'm thankful for learning the difference between being tolerated and being treasured, I said. And I'm thankful for finding people who understand that family is something you build, not something you're stuck with. After dinner, while everyone else was watching football and the kids were running around the backyard, I called Sarah in Denver. Dad, happy Thanksgiving. How are you doing? I'm good, sweetheart. Really good. I'm so glad to hear that. Are you? Are you spending the day alone? Actually, I just finished dinner with 17 other people. 17? Where on earth did you find 17 people? I told her about Maria, about the family of choice I'd stumbled into, about discovering that home wasn't a place you returned to, but a place you created, with people who wanted you there. That sounds wonderful. Dad, I'm so happy you found that. What about you? How are Tom and the kids? We're good. Actually, we've been talking, and we'd love for you to come visit for Christmas. The kids have been asking about Grandpa, and it's been too long since we've seen you. I'd like that. I said and meant it. Great, we'll make the arrangements. And Dad? Michael called me yesterday. Oh? He told me about Emma, about the phone call he was planning to make to you. Did he tell you about the conditions he wanted to attach to meeting her? He did, and I told him he was being an ass. Despite everything, I laughed. Did you really? I really did. I told him that you're not some dangerous stranger who needs to be managed and contained. You're our father and Emma's grandfather, and if he can't figure out how to make room in his life for family, then he's missing out on something precious. Thank you for that. I meant it. And Dad? I know this is hard, but I don't think this is the end of your relationship with Michael. I think he's scared and overwhelmed, and he's making bad decisions because of it. Maybe. But I can't keep waiting for him to decide I'm worth to me. Inconvenience. I know. And you shouldn't have to. After we hung up, I sat on Maria's back porch and watched James and Mrs. Patterson teaching a group of kids how to identify different types of clouds. It was peaceful in a way that had nothing to do with quiet and everything to do with belonging. My phone buzzed with a text. Message from an unknown number. Hi, Grandpa. This is Emma. Dad is typing this for me because I can't hold a phone yet, but I wanted you to know I exist and I hope we can meet someday. Love, your granddaughter. Below the message was a photo of a tiny, wrinkled face surrounded by a pink blanket. I stared at the photo for a long time, memorizing the curve of her cheeks, the way her fingers were curled into little fists, the alert expression that reminded me of Eleanor when she was concentrating on something important. Then I typed back, Hi, Emma. I hope we can meet someday, too. When your dad decides there's room in your life for a grandfather who loves you already. Until then, I'll be here building the kind of family I hope you'll want to be part of when you're old enough to choose for yourself. I sent the message and tucked my phone away. Someday, maybe, Michael would understand what he was choosing when he chose convenience over connection. Someday Emma might seek out the grandfather her father had decided was too complicated to accommodate, but I wasn't going to spend whatever time I had left waiting for. Someday, I was going to spend it with the people who'd already made room for me in their lives, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Not because I was convenient, but because I mattered. In the backyard, Carmen was starting a game of charades while Maria distributed leftover pie to anyone who could still eat. Mrs. Patterson was showing one of the kids how to press flowers between the pages of a book, and James was explaining to another group why leaves changed colors in fall. I walked back inside to join them, leaving my phone and my expectations about blood family behind. After all, I'd already found the family I needed, and they'd found room for me. Not in their guest bedroom or their schedule or their carefully managed lives, but in their hearts. That was the only room that really mattered.